So I've made a lot of videos criticizing the political system of the United States as well as criticizing the Democratic Socialist Party of the United States too. This video is based on a Substack article where I go into a deeper criticism of the Democratic Socialist Party that goes beyond just criticizing the certain predominant members that I like to criticize, being AOC, Bernie Sanders, and Zohran Mamdani, who recently won the mayoral election of New York. This video will still criticize those three figures as well as some other people, and also will give a background to that. But the main function of this is to criticize the DSA as a organization that seeks to reform the political system rather than change it as a whole. And I will get into that in a second. But before I do that, like I said, this video is based on Substack articles that I write. I try to get them done at least weekly. You can find the link in the description. It's the second link. The first link will be a link for helping out Palestinians as they are still undergoing genocidal tendencies by the Israeli government, who have over 400 violations of the ceasefire and continue to kill women, children, and men who have nothing to do with Hamas or attacking Israel. They are just trying to live their lives. But Israel is doing this with impunity because the United States and the Western world continues to allow it. Without further ado, let's go ahead and discuss the Democratic Socialists. Before we can get into the discussion, just a brief review for those who may not know or may have not watched my other videos. If you want more expansion on this, I will mention where you can find this. For political ideologies that we're about to get into, and for the examination of the political system as a whole in the United States, you can go back to an early video I made last year about the political situation in the United States. Basically, the Democrats and the Republicans are a part of the same the same party. They are both the pro-business party. The Republicans always have been. The Democrats have been since about the Carter administration. They have separate factions. The Republicans are typically conservative. They're open about being pro-corporation and pro-wealthy interest, and they typically sell voters on this through single-party issues like abortion. Democrats are a little more hidden about it, and they're a little more socially progressive, but they really aren't socially progressive or financially or economically progressive in the ways they actually do things. In fact, the current administration or the current people who make up the Democratic Party, outside of the people we're going to discuss today for the Democratic Socialist Party, who are in a separate category themselves, would more than likely be conservatives anywhere else in the world should they run their platforms there. Uh, the main issue with the United States political system is that it helps enhance the positions of the ultra wealthy and of the corporate sector while ignoring that of the labor class and the working poor. It does this because the corporate sector and the ultra wealthy basically own Congress. They pour millions upon millions, if not billions of dollars into every single election campaign from the federal level and the state level to ensure that their interests are always protected. The masses, the mass population of the working class and the poor, have very little to no say in the United States government whatsoever. And because of this, they are exploited, they face worsening conditions, worse jobs, and things like no access to real health care in this country. Anybody can tell you we have the richest country in the entire world, but of the other industrialized nations in the world, we are probably the worst when it comes to healthcare, especially healthcare inequality and healthcare access. And similar things can be said about the private prison system and so on and so forth. We have a system that works specifically for the corporate and wealthy class because that's how this system is set up. That's the whole point of a capitalist system, a state capitalist system as we have in the United States, in which the state is only there to protect capitalist and pro-capitalist interest and crush anything else. And what's the main thing capitalist needs? Well, it needs to exploit labor, it needs to keep labor wages down, and it needs a population that is always in need of jobs. In fact, a very public speech to Congress in 1994 or 5 pretty much said this, that one of the things that we need to do in the United States as the wealthy class is to continue to make sure that there is a lot of job insecurity and that workers are always scared they could lose their jobs and scared that if they ask for any of the things that they actually need or unionize, they'll lose any of the minute benefits that they have from this. So that's the American political and economic system. It's totally run by the ultra wealthy and corporate sector, enhancing their capitalist tendencies. Now, with that all being said, and knowing that the Democrats and Republicans both support these tendencies, we can then look at the DSA through this lens as a system that primarily serves corporate and wealthy interest as capitalism does. Capitalism exists just for this. It does not exist as a system of free market or free trade. That's not really what it is. The capitalist system exists only to ensure that the ultra wealthy and the corporate sector stay ultra wealthy and corporate sector. Of course, there's infighting between them and all sorts of things. There's oligarchy. There's the oligarchs and the corporations that really got into it in this last election. But for the most part, they all have similar to combining interest. The DSA wants to change these problems through reform. Bernie Sanders, AOC, Zohran Mamdani, as well as other members of the Democratic Socialist Party, want to just become a part of this system so that they can fix the system from within. We're going to get to the issues of this, but I'm going to explain this very briefly. They want healthcare reform. So they would like a single payer healthcare reform, or well, they would, however, they could get theirs first. So it'd be things like getting to Obamacare first, which was better than the system beforehand. Sure, you can argue that, right? You can also argue very strongly against that. But they would like to just see extension of the subsidies of Obamacare and then further work their way slowly towards the system. They would like to see very slow moving, and these are just, once again, this is just how it would be as I get to the criticisms. They want to see reform when it comes to our emissions and the damage we're doing to our environment. The same thing with public transport. All of this. They think the best way of doing this is to work within the system that is creating these problems. The system itself, there's a very big misconception amongst a lot of thinkers, a lot of intellectual thinkers, a lot of young people, a lot of old people, voters, etc. There's very big misconceptions that the system of the United States is broken and it just needs fixed. The system is not broken at all. This is how the system is supposed to be working. When you see things like healthcare inequality and no access to healthcare, and so many Americans living with pre-existing conditions and cancer, higher rates of death, this sort of thing, especially infant mortality, this is how the system works because the system wanted privatized healthcare. Anything that can be privatized and capital to be made from it, this is what capitalism will then privatize and make money from. There's no misconceptions about that to the capitalist. This is why they do this. The system isn't broken. It was never supposed to help you in the first place. So the Democratic Socialists are the types who think that reform is the way to go. They're under the lens of the system's broken and we need to fix it. At least that's my interpretation of what they're saying. They could think that the whole system needs to go too, but they think the way to fix the system is to reform it. There were early arguments like this in Germany among the leftist classes as well. Rosa Luxemburg talked about that in her pamphlet Reform or Revolution because there are a lot of reformists and there are a lot of revolutionaries. And today that's essentially what I'm talking about as well. Do we have reform or do we look for revolution? Well, let's talk about the history of reforms in this country. Well, we got reforms in the freedom of the American slaves and releasing them into free lives. And what happened? Well, they got their freedoms pretty much all rolled back almost immediately, and the implementation of Jim Crow in the South and other laws throughout the whole country made it to where African Americans really weren't free until the 50s or 60s of the 20th century. And then after that, we had the reforms of the New Deal, which gave workers and Americans some little rights. Like we had the Social Security Act, Medicaid and Medicare, and we had the government give, a bunch of Americans jobs. And what happened as soon as World War II was over? Well, that all got rolled back almost instantly. In fact, before these upcoming cuts to Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security that the Trump administration is pushing through their big, beautiful bill, well, all these were stagnating. These bills were all stagnating, and we hadn't seen any real raises of this for a long time. The minimum wage was implemented through unionization and pushes for it, as well as cutting down hours to the 40-hour work week through work for the labor movement in the late 19th century. And what happened? Well, the minimum wage has stagnated. It hasn't been raised substantially, really ever, but the last time it was raised was in 2008, 2009, when it was raised to 725, and it stayed there. Over a decade of just stagnation of a minimum wage. That realistically, well, there are states that are raising it up to about $15 an hour, so realistically, it should be around the $25 range at this point to meet the cost of living. Then, of course, we had the civil rights movement, and the same thing. All these acts get passed. The second Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and other leaders were assassinated, we saw the rollback of all of these policies, and there was no true progress. So reformers, like the Democratic Socialists, want to see these reforms happen. And on paper, that's a fine idea if you just don't know. But Bernie Sanders and AOC and Mondani should all know that reform is not the answer here. You can't reform a system that is working precisely as the system should be working. And if you do get those changes in that system, the second nobody's paying attention, or the second they just feel like it, they're going to strip all of that away. It's happened time and time again in the United States and elsewhere in the world, and it just doesn't work. So, say we do get some sort of healthcare reform, we did, right? We had Obamacare in the Affordable Health Care Act, which was passed. It was a disaster because of the limitations of it. Obama has all sorts of excuse of why we didn't just get a single payer healthcare reform. But the truth of the matter is this healthcare reform is arguably as bad or worse than what we had before. And it created a whole new list of problems that would not have been there had we just had a Medicare for all system or had a system like everywhere else in the industrialized world. So the Democratic Socialists want to implement reforms. And we can already pretty much tell that if you do implement these reforms, they're going to be fought against every single minute of every single day until they're gone. And there's not enough. Americans just don't have the attention span or the push. In fact, through manufacturing of consent that Walter Lippmann perfected in the early 19th in the early 20th century and then moved forward with, more than likely Americans will be pushed to support the disintegration of whatever reforms were done. So what is the actual answer? Well, the answer is you can't reform the system, so you need to get rid of the system entirely. From an anarchist point of view, this would just mean implementing a direct democracy with human beings having total autonomy over their lives. Now, I don't think that that should happen in a quick way. I think changing the system to a more democratic socialism would be fine if that's the whole system itself. But you cannot implement a democratic socialist system with also keeping the tenets of capitalism, especially the tenets of capitalism we have here. We've seen it all over the world. Everywhere there's been these sorts of reforms, they're instantly rolled back. The whole system has to go. And so you get rid of the system through using the labor movement. You get the Starbucks workers who are currently going on strike. Don't eat Starbucks right now, honestly, ever because of how they support Israel. But don't go on Starbucks workers, and they support Israel's genocidal tendencies toward the Palestinians. That's why you should boycott Starbucks. But as well as Starbucks workers are going on strike. McDonald's workers should go on strike. Walmart, Sam's Club, Kroger, every retail and fast food store should go on strike. The very few manufacturing organizations here in the United States should also go on strike, as well as a combined boycott of all consumer goods that we can realistically deal without. And through that, we can actually change the system into a system that is a pro-populist system, a pro-labor system, and protects us instead of regularly exploits us. Democratic socialism is not the answer because it looks to become a part of the system that makes these issues. You could not be a part of a system that contributes to the problem and hope to fix the problem. You just can't. If you'd like to hear more about this in substance and more detail, the Substack will be the second article in the description. The first one, as always, will be a link to helping out Palestinians as they continue to go through ongoing genocidal tendencies, repeated ceasefire violations, and the ethnic cleansing of their region and stealing of their homes. Thank you so much for watching this video. I have been Zachariah, and I will see you next time.